Hi everybody, I'm Mike McCrory and this is Would You Make It? In this video, I'm collaborating with another YouTube channel called Triple S Games. It's a great resource full of short and easy to understand videos that go straight to explaining how to play hundreds of games. I've put a link in the description so you can check them out. I'm going to make them a new chess set that they can use for teaching how to play chess. The chessboard is relatively small to fit within the constraints of their studio and their filming process, and the chess pieces are discs rather than traditional chess pieces, so that they're easy to distinguish when filming with the camera above the board. So, let's get started. I'm going to start by making the chess pieces, and then I'll make the chessboard at the end. For the pieces, I'm using cherry, maple, and walnut. I'll begin with the cherry because the walnut and maple are going to be inlaid into it. I cut the cherry on the bandsaw to be around 8 inches wide because that's all my jointer can handle. I cut it a little bit too wide, so I'll joint the two edges first to reduce it in size, and then I can joint one of the faces. After jointing, I resaw it on the bandsaw to be a little bit more than 5/8 of an inch thick, and then I'll run it through the planer to get the other face flat and parallel to the other side. I'll mark the approximate center of the board, and then drill a 1/8 inch hole through that point. This will be the reference point that I'll use to align my 1/8 inch router bit to make sure that the piece is positioned correctly each time after removing and remounting the piece on the CNC router. This will help to ensure that everything is correctly aligned. And this is especially important because these will be double-sided pieces, so everything needs to be aligned on both sides. On the first side, I'll be inlaying maple plugs, so while the CNC is busy carving the female portion into the cherry, I'll work on preparing the maple piece to be inlaid. Just like with the cherry, I will trim it to 8 inches wide, and then joint it, resaw it, and plane it to the right thickness. The CNC is still working. After carving the perimeter of each pocket using a 30-degree V-bit, I will follow up with a 1/8 inch clearance bit. Using a clearance bit takes far less time than trying to carve out the entire pocket with a V-bit. Next, I'll carve out the male plugs on the maple. Similarly, I'll use a clearance bit to finish up the job. Then I'll cut out the strips to remove the excess material that would prevent them from being inserted. I'm using way too many clamps here, so next time I do a glue up, I'll use a caul. While the glue is drying, I will carve the male portions of the chest pieces into the walnut, starting with a 15-degree V-bit and following up with a clearance bit. While that is working, I can go back to the cherry board, trim off the excess maple, and then prepare it to be mounted on the CNC router again. Next, with the 15-degree V-bit, the same bit that I used for carving the male inlay, I'll now carve the female portion of the chest pieces to accept the walnut inlay. I will also carve the walnut plugs for the other side and then cut out the walnut strips of the male chest pieces. Now it's time to glue the male chest pieces into the maple. I'll use an extra piece of cherry on top as a caul to distribute the force. While the glue is drying, I'll get the CNC to carve out the male portions of the chest pieces for the other side. On this side, the male portions will be carved from maple. After the glue has dried, I can trim the excess walnut inlay off on the bandsaw and then run it through the drum sander to get that side cleaned up. Then it's back to the CNC router to begin preparing the other side of the pieces. This side is going to be a little different because I need to carve out the pockets for the walnut plugs, but also a deeper and slightly narrower pocket to hold a 1 ounce weight. By the time we're done, there will be almost no cherry left except for a thin band around the perimeter of each piece. For this glue up, I cannot use wood glue because of the metal that I will be placing in the center, so I will use some total boat epoxy. I need to be sure to put in enough epoxy so that it will surround the lead weights and leave enough epoxy on the top to secure the walnut plugs. This time I'm carving the female portions of the chest pieces with the 15-degree V-bit and the 1/8 inch clearance bit. After this pass, you can see that some of the thin portions of the walnut broke away, so I'm going to address that by dyeing the glue dark brown to simulate the color of the walnut that would have been there. I'll add the brown glue specifically in those places where those thin walnut pieces may have broken off. Then I'll clamp it up and let it sit overnight. The next day, I'll do the last trimming of the excess inlay material. After that, the pieces are ready to be cut out. I had the CNC leave 2 small tabs to prevent the pieces from popping out, but I must have made the tabs too small because the first one did pop out. To minimize any potential damage, I stayed close to the machine and used my finger to hold each piece at the end of each pass to prevent it from popping out. After that, each piece required a bit of sanding to remove the leftover wood fibers and tabs around the perimeter. Then I used a 1/16 inch roundover bit to make the edges of each piece a little nicer. And then I sprayed the pieces several times with a satin lacquer. Now it's time to start working on the chessboard. I'm making the squares out of hickory and walnut, so I'll start by resawing the hickory. I do a light pass on the jointer after every cut so that I have a flat surface to run along the fence of the bandsaw. I'll sand the pieces down to a little less than 1/4 of an inch thick. And then I'll joint each edge to make sure that they're straight. And then I'll run them through the table saw to cut them to the correct width. Each square will be about 4.1 centimeters, or about 1 5/8 inches. I check the first cut carefully with my calipers before cutting all of the other pieces. I'll cut the hickory pieces to length using my chop saw, and then everything is ready for the first glue up. I clamp these with a piece of plywood on the top and bottom to keep everything as flat as possible. After the glue has dried, I'll do the same glue up for the other side. After both glue-ups have dried, I'll run them through the drum sander and then I can cut the squares on the table saw. This board is small enough that I don't have to use my crosscut sled, which is really convenient because it means I do not have to move my fence from where it was. That way, the squares will be perfectly square. Next, I'll cut out a piece of plywood that will be a ½ an inch larger around the perimeter. This will be used to glue on the frame. I have some special cauls that I use every time for my glue-ups, so I'm checking to make sure that they fit correctly. If I need to, I can adjust the size of the plywood at this point, but they fit perfectly. Now I'll glue up both sides of the board. Next, it's time to work on the frame. I have white oak left over from another project. I don't need a lot of it because this frame is going to be quite small. Before cutting the groove into the frame to fit around the plywood, I'll orient the pieces so that the grain is the nicest. And then I'll sneak up on the fit. Next, I'll cut the miters for each of the pieces. Next, I'll carve algebraic notation into the frame using a 30-degree V-bit. Before adding the black epoxy, I'm coating the top of the frame with shellac to help keep the epoxy from penetrating into the wood grain. It's quite tricky to keep the epoxy out of the grain when working with oak, so undoubtedly there will be some traces left behind. Next, I'll carve the Triple S Games logo into two of the corners of the board. I'm doing this in 2 passes to use 2 colors of epoxy. I think I carved the logo too deep because it's hard to tell that it's actually 2 colors. Next, I'll ease the edges of the frame with the 16-inch roundover bit. Now it's ready for the finish. I'll start with some de-waxed shellac. That helps to seal the wood, and it also raises the grain a bit. I'll lightly sand it with 320 grit sandpaper, and then I'll spray on several coats of pre-catalyzed lacquer with sanding in between each coat. After receiving the chess set, Triple S Games decided to have even more contrast between the chess pieces to make them easier to distinguish on their videos, which is very important for teaching, so they've decided to add black and white stickers on the tops and bottoms of the pieces to enhance the appearance. I think that was a good decision. A big thanks to Jim from Triple S Games for giving me the opportunity to make this chess set. You'll be able to see this board and the pieces in action in their upcoming How to Play Chess videos. So I gotta ask, would you make it?